There is a silent pain that inhabits human hearts, a primitive wound that precedes any conscious memory. It is the mark of original abandonment, that visceral feeling of not being sufficient, of not deserving permanence. And it is precisely in this dark territory that many of our love relationships find their true fuel. It is not love that moves us, but the desperate need to notice something that has been broken for a long time when we were small and defenseless. Note around you the relationships you know. How many times have you witnessed someone repeatedly choosing the same kind of partner who hurts him? How many times have you been attracted to those who arouse in you that familiar feeling of insecurity, of having to fight to be chosen? This is no coincidence. It is the echo of an ancestral wound that seeks its healing through romantic love, as if the recognition of the other could finally fill the void left by those who should have stayed, but left. Imagine for a moment an old inhabitant of the caves, our Neanderthal ancestor, perplexed by the love rituals of modern humans. He would see creatures who voluntarily put themselves in situations of suffering, who pursue those who reject them, that begging attention as if their lives depended on it. For that primitive being, who knew only the genuine connection or the natural removal, our neurotic dance of love would seem a cruel puzzle. Why do these creatures get hurt voluntarily? Why do they seek to be seen by those who do not see them clearly? The answer lies in the addictive nature of the emotional wound. Like any dependence, it creates a cycle. Pain generates necessity. Need generates search. Search generates more pain. And so each relationship becomes an unconscious attempt to rewrite the original story of abandonment. Each "I love you" carries with you a "please don't leave me" whispered. Each romantic gesture hides a desperate question. Now are you going to stay? We live as if we were eternal children knocking on the door of those who do not want to open us, believing that if we insist on enough, if we are good enough, if we love intensely enough, we will finally be chosen. And when this does not happen, because it cannot happen when motivation is lack and not true love, we interpret as confirmation of our own insufficiency, further feeding the wound that drives us. This dynamic creates a sophisticated emotional trap. We confuse intensity with depth, drama with passion, need with love. We become addicted to the adrenaline of uncertainty, the emotional roller coaster of being chosen and rejected alternately. It is as if we have developed an unconscious preference for the family pain of abandonment, because at least it is known to us. The cruel is that this wound makes us believe that we find our great love just when we find someone who arouses our deepest insecurity. We call chemistry what is actually the recognition of a destructive pattern. We baptize with destination what is just the repetition of an unresolved trauma. And so we go through relationships that are, in essence, attempts at emotional therapy disguised as romance. We chose partners not for who they are, but for what we hope they heal in us. We transform love into medicine, the other into a doctor, and ourselves into eternal patients of a disease that we cannot name. But if there is something that differentiates the modern human from that Neanderthal observer, is precisely the ability of consciousness to see one's own standards and choose to break them. The question that arises then is not if we will continue to love, but if we will continue to confuse love with need, connection with dependence, choose with compulsion. We really believe that we choose our partners, that there is something mysterious called chemistry, an inexplicable attraction that guides us toward the right person, that the heart has its reasons that reason is unaware of. But this is one of the most beautiful and dangerous illusions we cultivate about ourselves. In fact, our love choices are much less free than we imagined, and much more predictable than we would like to admit. The child you were one day created an emotional map of the world based on your early experiences of love and abandonment. Each time someone important came out of your life, every time you had to fight for attention, each time you had to prove your value to be loved, your child mind recorded this information as fundamental truths about how love works. And it is this distorted map that you carry within you, guiding your adult choices unconsciously. Carl Jung taught us about the collective unconscious, but there is also a personal unconscious where our relational ghosts inhabit. This is where the original abandonment lives. Not necessarily a specific event, but the archetypal experience of discovering that love may end, that people can leave, that you may not be enough. This primordial wound becomes the mold through which we see all future love possibilities. That's why you feel strangely attracted to those who arouse your anxiety. That's why you feel that you don't roll who treats you well from the beginning. So it confuses boredom with incompatibility when someone offers stable and predictable love. Your wounded mind interprets tranquility as disinterest, security as a lack of passion. You have been conditioned to associate true love with struggle, with conquest, with the feeling of always proving your value. Imagine our mind as a psychic cave, in the depths of which we forever projected the same shadows on the walls. Like the prisoners of the Platonic myth, we take these projections by reality. We see partners where there are only reflexes of our own internal standards. We chose different faces to interpret the same roles in our intimate piece of abandonment and reconquest. The most fascinating is like our lack of disguise of preference. We say I like challenging people when we are actually saying I need anyone who makes me feel the familiar desperation of not being chosen. We talk about strong personality when we seek someone who treats us with the same emotional neglect we have learned to call love. We create sophisticated rationalizations for our compulsion to repeat the original trauma. This is not a conscious choice. It is an unconscious program running in background, influencing from the type of person who draws our attention to a party, to the relationships we can support in the long run. We are as emotional automatons, following scripts written by injured children who still live within us, directing the show of our adult love life. The tragedy is that this pattern is perpetuated because we confuse its repetition with destination. When we find someone who arouses our deeper insecurity, we feel that that's it. We find our soulmate. We do not realize that we are just recognizing the echo of our own wound reverberating in the other. It is not love at first sight. It is trauma recognizing trauma. And so we live imprisoned in our psychic cave, always choosing the same shadows projected on the walls, believing that each new silhouette is an original discovery. We do not realize that we are ourselves projecting the images, creating the illusions, choosing the disappointments. Freedom of choice in love remains a distant ideal until we illuminate the depths of our own emotional cave. But there is a crucial difference between recognizing this pattern with despair and recognizing it with consciousness. One keeps us prisoners, the other opens the first crack of light toward the true choice. In the center of every overwhelming passion, there is a silent conflict that we rarely dare to appoint. On the one hand, the burning desire to be loved, chosen, validated. On the other, the terror to be forgotten, rejected, abandoned again. This tension is not accidental. It is the very essence of the wounded ego in action, using love as a battlefield for a war that began long before the first romantic date. The passionate ego does not truly seek the other. He seeks himself reflected in the eyes of the love. Each romantic gesture hides an urgent question. Do you see me? I'm important to you. Will I stay in your memory when I'm not here? Passion then becomes a sophisticated form of emotional begging, where each I love you carries with it a love me, implicit and desperate. Note Maria, a 35-year-old woman who has been involved with emotionally unavailable men for 2 decades. She describes them as mysterious, complex, challenging. In fact, everyone shares the same feature, the inability to offer the emotional security she secretly wants. When a kind and present man is interested in her, Maria feels that there is no chemistry. What she calls chemistry is actually the cold family in the belly of imminent rejection, the adrenaline of the constant struggle for attention. Maria does not choose these men even though they hurt her. She chooses them because they hurt her. His wound of child abandonment created an unconscious equation. True love, inevitable suffering. Any relationship that does not arouse your anxiety is automatically classified as superficial or boring. She does not realize that she is trying to regain her emotionally absent father through each new, equally absent partner. This dynamic reveals an uncomfortable truth about the nature of the injured ego. It prefers family pain to unknown healing. It is safer to repeat the known pattern of abandonment than risking the genuine vulnerability of being truly seen and accepted. The wounded ego whispers, "At least when they reject me, I know who I am. I am the person who is not enough, and that I can handle." The soul, however, begs for something different. It yearns for authenticity, the true connection, the love that does not require constant performance. But the soul speaks low, while the wounded ego screams loudly. And so we continue to choose partners that confirm our inadequacy internal narrative, because it is easier to maintain the known wound than to face the frightening possibility of healing. The passionate ego transforms love into a project of personal salvation. Each relationship becomes an attempt to rewrite the original story of abandonment. This time it will be different, we promise to ourselves. This time I will be loved the way I always needed. But as motivation is repair and not genuine love, the result is always the same. One more confirmation that we are not worthy of permanence. The cruel irony is that the more intensely we seek validation through romantic love, the less capable we become to recognize it when it genuinely appears. We have developed a selective blindness for those who offer a stable love, interpreting care as disinterest, consistency as a lack of passion. Our wounded ego only recognizes as true love what arouses our deepest insecurity. It is as if we have developed emotional sugar, addicted emotional papillae, unable to taste the real nutrients of a healthy connection. We call it insipid what is sustainer, boring what is genuine. We prefer the emotional roller coaster of toxic passion to the frightening stability of mature love. The wounded ego convinces us that this constant struggle is noble, romantic, worthy of movies and songs. He romanticizes loving suffering as if it were proof of emotional depth. But there is nothing deep to compulsively repeat the same destructive pattern. It's not love, it's a repair attempt. And until we recognize this fundamental difference, we will continue prisoners of our own wound, using each new relationship as another opportunity to hurt each other familiarly. We live immersed in one of the most seductive and destructive fantasies of human psychology. The belief that someone can reach our lives and fill the emptiness we carry within us. This is the fallacy of redeeming love. The dangerous illusion that there is somewhere in the world a person capable of healing our deepest wounds through the simple act of loving us. It is a sweet lie that romantic culture sells us since childhood, packed in fairy tales and happy ending movies. The uncomfortable truth is that no one can fill the hole of abandonment you carry. No one can go back in time and give the wounded child who lives within you what he has not received. No one can love you enough that you finally feel complete, because completeness doesn't come from outside. It already exists inside you, just forgotten under layers of pain and conditioning. But our culture teaches us the opposite. From an early age, we are bombarded with the narrative of Salvador romance. The idea that there is a predestined soulmate that will come as a bright armor knight to rescue us from our existential loneliness. This narrative is a sophisticated emotional trap that keeps us eternally looking for outside of ourselves what can only be found inside. Our Neanderthal ancestor would observe this frantic search with genuine perplexity. He knew only two realities: the natural connection that arises between compatible beings, or instinctive clearance when there is no resonance. There was no such a neurotic need to be saved by another in his primitive world. He did not ask for love, he simply lived real connection when she presented herself, with no expectations of redemption or healing. Neanderthal had not yet developed the sophisticated human capacity to create romantic narratives about lack. He didn't need someone to fill his void because he had not yet learned to feel empty. Its identity did not depend on external validation. His self-esteem did not float according to the interest or disinterest of a partner. He was simply without having to be completed by another. We modern humans have developed a much more complex and problematic relationship with love. We turn partners into personal salvation projects. We hope they hinder trauma that we cannot heal ourselves. Let them delegate the impossible responsibility to make us feel whole, worthy, sufficient. And when they inevitably fail this impossible mission, why could they not fail? We blame them for not what they could never be. This search for the perfect pair is actually a sophisticated escape of responsibility for our own healing. It is more comfortable to believe that our unhappiness is due to the absence of the right person than recognizing that they are due to our own disconnection with ourselves. It is easier to look for an external savior than to do the internal work needed to become whole. The culture of the Redeemer novel addicts us in the fantasy of which it exists somewhere, one capable of loving us so perfectly that all our wounds will cure themselves magically. This fantasy prevents us from developing a healthy relationship with ourselves. We always stared out, waiting, searching, longing for the arrival of the romantic Redeemer that will free us from our own company. The result is a generation of emotionally dependent adults, unable to sustain creative loneliness, addicted to constant validation, always looking for in the other which refuses to cultivate in themselves. We transform love into medicine, into a disease that we don't even know how to diagnose correctly. The irony is that the more desperately we look for someone who completes us, the less complete we become. The more we depend on external validation, the less capable we are validated internally. The more we expect to be saved by love, the more lost we get from our own power of self-healing. It is time to confront this fundamental fallacy. It is time to recognize that true love is not a project of mutual salvation, but a meeting between two already whole beings, already complete in themselves, that choose to share their completeness rather than trying to fill in the other. We then come to the most beautiful and frightening paradox of the human journey. True love does not arise when we need it, but when we least depend on it. The path of loving consciousness does not stop loving. This would be impossible for a human heart, but to stop waiting for the other to heal our existential pain. It is an inverted path, which goes against everything they have taught us about romance and relationships. Conscious love is born from a radically different place from lack. It doesn't ask, "What can you do for me?" but "What can I offer genuinely?" It does not require guarantees of permanence, does not negotiate with emotional blackmail, does not transform the partner into therapist or personal salvation project. It is a love that comes from inner abundance, not from emotional scarcity. Imagine the ancestral fire that warmed the caves of our ancestors. When well cared for and respected, it offered heat, light, protection, food, But when misunderstood or used with despair, he burned, destroyed, consumed everything around. Conscious love is like this primitive fire, a powerful force that warms up when respected, but consumes when moved by compulsive need. Our Neanderthal observer intuitively understood this difference. It was not close to the fire to heal from a wound. It approached when it wanted to share its natural heat with the heat of the flame. There was no such a neurotic need to be validated by fire, to prove its value to the fireplace, to fear that the flames abandon him. It simply shared presence with presence, heat with heat. Conscious love demands from us an internal revolution. We need to stop seeing each other as the solution to our existential problems and start seeing it as it really is. Another complex human being with his own wounds, his own searches, his own ways of healing. When we stop projecting our salvation expectations in it, we can finally begin to know it for real. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is a gradual process of detachment from the romantic fantasies that have been sold to us as absolute truths. It is learning to support creative loneliness without despair, to cultivate a love relationship with oneself before looking for love relationships with others. It is to develop the frightening ability to be well alone, not as resignation, but as a conscious choice. Conscious love does not deny vulnerability. On the contrary, it completely embraces it. But there is a fundamental difference between the vulnerability that comes from the strength and the one that comes from weakness. The first one says, "I'm whole and I choose to open it to you." The second begs, "I am broken and I need you to fix me." One invites to genuine intimacy, the other to emotional dependence. When we begin to love consciously, we find that we can offer real presence rather than a disguised need. We can pay genuine attention without expecting to be filled in return. We can celebrate each other's freedom instead of trying to control it. We can support the natural uncertainty of all relationships without turning it into paralyzing anxiety. This is a love that does not ask, it offers. It does not require, it shares. No cobra, he contributes. It is a love that can include passion, desire, commitment, but that is not enslaved by them. It is a love capable of letting go when necessary, not out of indifference, but out of deep respect for the essential freedom of all beings. The path of conscious love teaches us that true intimacy is only possible between two beings who do not need each other to feel complete. That true passion only arises when we do not depend on it for our self-esteem. That the true connection only happens when we stop looking compulsively. It is a frightening way because it takes us the illusion of control over the other's love. But it is also a liberating path because it gives us the power over our own emotional well-being. It teaches us that we can love deeply without losing ourselves in the process. That we can deliver ourselves completely without sacrificing unnecessarily. And so we come to the question that echoes like an ancestral echo through all our relationships, past and future. Are you loving or just trying to be chosen? The answer to this question determines not only the quality of your relationships, but the quality of your own existence. Because in the end, learning to love consciously is learning to consciously live, and it changes everything. You don't have to repeat the abandonment to feel that it exists. Real love starts when you decide to stay for you. And if something in you woke up today, then you subscribe, not to follow another channel, but to remember every week that there is a way of loving, which does not hurt the same as childhood,